Welcome to the Inspiring Good podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Community Foundation of Elkhart County, which serves a vibrant community in northern Indiana known for its generosity and strong network of nonprofit organizations. I'm Marshall King, your co-host with Kevin Deary, a veteran nonprofit CEO who now coaches others. Our guest today is Chris Kingsley, President and CEO of ADEC, Inc., a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing services and support to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in Indiana. Previously, Chris was the CEO of Casa, Inc. Chris, we're delighted to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
Thanks so much. Good to be here, Marshall. Good to be here, Kevin.
Chris, so good to have you. I have to ask you, so I'm going to start my questions with a curveball. All
right.
Tell me about the egg challenge.
The egg challenge. We had a fundraiser called Picture Possibilities, and we did that during the pandemic when it was hard to do in-person events. And so one of the challenges, there would be weekly challenges in that. One of the challenges was, I think it was a humor challenge. And this is my wife. My wife, she is a fun person. And I always tell people in organizations that I lead that I believe in fun, but I'm not the most fun person in the world. So she had the fun idea of the egg challenge, and it is you have raw eggs and you have hard-boiled eggs, and it's basically a Russian roulette. You're each taking turns smacking an egg on your forehead. I did not fare well in that challenge with my wife. I wore some good egg on my head for that, so all for the cause.
And of course, I saw that on Facebook, and I like to do research on our guests, and that came up, and I think I watched that 3 times. It was 12 eggs, and you just had bad luck. Actually, you guys have great luck. All three of you two both picked 3 eggs in a row. Out of 8 or 12.
We didn't fare well.
No, but your face was hilarious when you smashed it on your head, and your children were watching. I take it those were your children.
Absolutely.
They laughed and giggled,
Yeah.
and so we're just so happy to have you on the show. And
appreciate
you're one of the top CEOs in the county. We just really appreciate you taking time to be out with us. Tell us about your journey. You had told me about your beginnings with ADEC and your father. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, I've been leading ADEC since the beginning of 2023, and boy, of course I was leading Casa, love the work of Casa. I worked there for 12 years, and when the position at ADEC opened up, I was very happily doing my thing, but boy, it tugged at me. And what you alluded to, my dad spent 40 years, his whole career at ADEC. He was one of many people who thought they had a stop along the way at ADEC and then ended up spending their careers there. He spent his career supporting employment opportunities for people with disabilities, and that's what I grew up around. I worked summers at ADEC Industries, and I couldn't shake it back in, I guess it would have been 2022 when there was the work going on to fill the position, and here I am.
I felt the same tug in 1993 when I had no really big desire to come out to Indiana from New England, and this one job opened up in a little town called Goshen, Indiana, just a little small club, and it was like God would not leave me alone. So I applied for it, and I said, I'll probably have no shot at it, and that was 32 years ago. So, sometimes you have to respond to that tug, so good job on that.
Yeah,
so you have a deep passion for people with disabilities, and I love watching you interact in your world. Tell me a little bit about what the mission of ADEC is and some of the programs.
Yeah, so ADEC's mission is to empower people with disabilities to live fulfilled lives in their communities. And the background of ADEC is, and really the background of the type of work that we do, is that society has not always done well with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They've not always been a part of our community. In fact, large institutions were unfortunately a destination that a lot of people spent their lives in decades past. And organizations like ADEC really formed with the idea that these are valued, beloved people in our community, that we want to support them living fulfilled lives within the community. And so that's really the mission of ADEC, and we accomplish that mission through a lot of different services. A lot of the people that we work with need holistic paid supports in order to live their best life. And so that means residential services. A lot of people that we serve do need 24-hour staffing. A lot of them are involved in our day programs for adults during the days. But then we also serve a lot of people with employment support. So we're connecting people with employment opportunities and then supporting that employment opportunity over time. But then we also have some services like therapies that we offer in a summer camp that's really a big piece of the Elkhart County fabric and is a growing piece, as we'll be launching a summer camp in Mishawaka this year as well, because there's just a lot of need. A lot of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities aren't able to be well served in a traditional summer camp environment. So that's an important service that we provide as well.
So tell me about your group homes. How many do you have? How spread out are they?
Yeah, so we have 14 group homes. 10 of those are in Elkhart County, 4 of them in St. Joe County. A group home serves, in our context, it serves 8 people. It's a fully staffed residential environment. ADEC really manages the operations of that house, and the goal in a group home is you're seeking to create a family-like atmosphere. Our goal is never to do everything because we want to be a part of a household. And so if you go to the group home in the evening, you'll have residents of that home who are helping make supper and who are involved in the home life. And then people who live in a group home are typically involved also in either some kind of employment opportunity or a day program. So the goal in those environments is to create a sense of normalcy, create a sense of independence from maybe just living with your family or some other environment, but then also to really promote a lot of community involvement and connection.
Tell me about your day program and your employment opportunities.
The day programs, we serve about 280 people across 6 programs that we offer for adults during the day. The adult day programming is really there to create a structured day, a meaningful day for people, as opposed to a day maybe where you would be more isolated or tech dependent. Our day programs do a lot of excursions into the community. We do a lot of volunteer engagements with other nonprofits. And then we have a lot of structured activity there at the program. On the employment side, we have employment consultants, a whole team of employment consultants across Elkhart and St. Joe County who are working with people. The referral source is the Voc Rehab program, and people come to us, and a lot of people that we serve are in that program, but looking for some form of meaningful employment. And depending on the person we work with, that could be 4 hours a week. It could be 40 hours a week. But we're looking for that opportunity to get involved in the workforce in an integrated environment where you're surrounded by a normal type of work environment. And we find that those types of employment arrangements, number one, they create a lot of fulfillment, a lot of self-sufficiency for people that we serve, but they also add a lot of benefit to the work culture of the employers that we work with on that type of programming.
So what kind of employers are you looking for? What do you have? And you mentioned full-time and part-time, but manufacturing, retail, probably all across the board.
Yeah, it's across the gamut, but there is a lot, I would say, on the retail, manufacturing, hospitality side, even some other environments, depending on the types of tasks involved. But yeah, I would say that those would be major sources for those employment partnerships.
Before I retired in my previous office, I would walk down a block in Goshen and I would go get coffee from your coffee house. And I was just so impressed with the staff that worked there and how on top of it they were and remembered customers' names and were always happy to see us. Tell me who had the idea about the coffee house?
Yeah, so that was a previous day program director who came up with that idea, and the idea behind it was, he calls it reverse integration. So we do a lot of leaving the day program to interact with the community, but the goal there was to put that in reverse and let's have the community come in. Now, we don't have at the Schutz building in Goshen that coffee shop anymore. That was a pre-pandemic casualty. Still have a day program there, and it's going wonderfully. But we do have the coffee shop there in Bristol that we continue to bring people in. People buy art, coffee, and it's a great way to engage with our mission.
Chris, tell us a little bit more about the community of folks who are otherly abled or disabled within our larger community. Like, How many people are we talking about that you would serve, and the range of what their lives look like that you would intersect with at your organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. So last year we served over 900 unique individuals. That would be in both in Elkhart and St. Joe County. There is a broad range of kind of spectrum of ability to live independently or self-sufficiently. Among that group, for us, we have a couple of our group homes would have more profound intellectual or developmental disabilities as well as medical needs. We would range all the way toward on the residential, a couple of apartments that we provide services to individuals living there who live very independent lives, but just need a few kind of hours of support, maybe helping with the grocery planning, maybe helping with some of the financial management of their budget or things like that. And then on the employment side, does serve a real spectrum on the employment side. Certainly continue to specialize in people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but also people with physical disabilities who are looking on the employment side. So it's a big range. And again, I think that 900 plus number gives you a sense for what we're talking about. The reality is we know that there's still another segment of people with the similar needs who are not getting served in our community. And then, of course, when you look at the Elkhart and St. Joe County environment, you've got another big player in terms of Logan in the St. Joe side, who would also serve a significant number of people with similar type of disabilities.
ADEC's been around 70 years. Your dad worked there for 40, and now you're the CEO. Tell me, how have things changed from the time when ADEC started to through your dad's transition into now your leadership? Tell me how it's changed.
Yeah, it's certainly grown a lot and adapted a lot, because at the beginning there was a focus on education for school age. And then there was also early on, there was an adult focused kind of work skills focused group as well. And those two ended up merging to become ADEC. But the funding sources have changed a lot, and the industry has changed a lot, and the expectations have changed a lot. And so ADEC has really adapted and grown according to, we stay very closely connected to industry groups, both at a state level and a national level. A lot of the funding changed. It started to flow through schools. So we became less involved with children and more involved with adults over time. And then the other thing that's changed is we serve a lot more people in what's called a supported living structure versus a group home structure that is a little bit more independent in nature.
You bring up a good point there. For many years, public schools were not a place for children with disabilities. And then suddenly schools were required in most states to offer education for people with disabilities, and I remember when that shift happened, and what that did to a lot of the nonprofit landscape as they had to shift to not only follow the funding but the biggest needs.
Yeah,
because school ends and parents are still working,
right.
and how does that? Those gaps in time there, the after school time. So that's an incredible gift that you guys have been able to just navigate that over those years.
And I would say ADEC has really been blessed with great leadership over a long period of time. A lot of at a board level, at a senior staff level, because you have to be in this work this long, that you have to be able to adapt, and we have to continue to be able to adapt as we try and meet our mission.
And I'm glad you brought up the word leadership, because it's time to transition to you. Tell me about your leadership. Tell me about your style, and then also the values that drive your leadership.
I think I really look at leadership as relationships. And so when I work in a setting, one of my big goals is to create really strong relationships specifically with my direct reports, certainly with my board. Those are the real key relationships, and then certainly with key stakeholders. But the reason I highlight relationships is you can certainly lead by virtue of your title, but I don't think it's the most effective way of leading. And I also I don't have a messiah complex, and I realize that I have a lot of gaps. Understanding that I really need the perspectives of my exec team. I need the perspectives of my board. I need a lot of perspectives to make good decisions. So I really there's a lot of value and a lot of importance in the title and in the org chart. And that should absolutely always be a part of how you organize. But then within that, I think the relationships are incredibly important. I think self-awareness is really important in leadership. I think the ability to value different personality types and perspectives I find to be really important. So those are certainly I would humility, the ability to listen, and relationships. Those would be some things I would lift up in terms of how I approach leadership.
Chris, the one thing I think that you work hard at as well that you didn't name is communication. At one point, you were still doing like a weekly message to staff that you would record your studio in the main offices and send that to staff. I'm not sure if you're still doing that, but that shows a lot of commitment to communicating to your staff. And I'm curious how many staff you have, and then if you could just talk about how communication also plays a role in that leadership.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that. And that is an ongoing practice. Is every week I do a video, and the goal of that is to keep our whole staff base connected with what's going on at ADEC, because we have people spread out all over the place. If you work in a group home, your world is that group home in terms of ADEC. So that's important. We do a lot of regular. We have HR bulletins and things like that I try to put messages into. I think being accessible and I try to get out and do visit at the various sites as well as regularly as possible. But that's really important to building a culture. We're right now about 360 staff, and they're spread out, and it's 24-hour staffing. You're never going to be in the room with everybody that works at ADEC, and that's been an adjustment from my previous work. So you have to find other ways to try and build culture. That's been one of the strategies, the weekly video, other forms of communication. But then you also really need to build culture with your leaders, because that has to cascade as well in order to do it effectively.
You mentioned the board of directors. Tell me about what makes a good board, how you interact with your board. It's an interesting dynamic between the executive and the board. We work for the board, but yet we have to work the board. So tell me about how that looks for you.
Yeah, relationships is what I would emphasize again. And when I think about a board, I think about these are people who, for whatever reason, are willing to make a serious investment in ADEC. And that's a big deal. And so you always want to value that when you work with it. I try and have at least twice a year, go out for breakfast, go out for lunch with every board member, get to know their perspectives. In a meeting environment, you're going to get some of that, but a lot of that needs to happen in other types of interactions. In terms of a good board, engagement is huge. Just being involved is huge. I think in the end, if I've got a group of people who bring some qualifications and then have a passion for the agency and truly are owning that commitment of showing up on the board, I'm probably 95% of the way there is how I feel about it. You can always wish that you had more influence or more this or more that, but the basic ingredients, I think, are qualification. You need somebody who's comfortable in a boardroom, and at that level of conversation, but then who loves what you do and is really going to show up for it. They're not just looking for that check on their bio or whatever.
One of the things that I found when I was working with boards was the opportunity to develop board members. They're not born knowing how to serve on a board. They come into a board situation many times for the first time, very passionate, but they really don't understand how a board functions or works or what their roles, responsibilities are. And we often find the executive is the teacher of that, yet we work for them. Yeah. And it's a very interesting dynamic. And I think you talked about the informal communication, how important that is. If you're only speaking to your board at board meetings, you're missing the opportunity to sharpen their saw. Yeah. You have to work with your board members outside of the boardroom as time allows to pass on knowledge, wisdom, and to teach them how to be a good board member. And as they get more experience, they don't need that as much, but they still need to talk with you.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about how important that is in working with that board?
Yeah, I like the bank account analogy when it comes to relationships. You invest and you make deposits in that. You build connections. I think you show transparency, you show candor in these settings, and that builds relationship equity. And it's really important because you will have hard decisions at times, and if you don't have that equity built up, it's not going to create the best environment for good decisions, and it's going to create other forms of anxiety that you wouldn't need to have. And so I think that's critical.
And this is a mistake that new executive directors make, new CEOs, is they don't spend that time with their board of directors except at the board meeting, and they wonder why they're as engaged. So I think you bring up a really strong best practice. If you were talking to a soon-to-be executive director, what are the 2 or 3 things of advice you would give them?
Really embrace humility. When you're going into, and there's different ways you can get into that role. You may be promoted internally or you may be coming from the outside, but really either way, if you're promoted internally, you have a perspective on the organization, but you've never sat in that chair before. So there are things you do not know, even if you think you do. If you're coming into another organization, I would just say, and I would say this to anyone going in at any level, is you've got to learn to love that place before you try and change that place. I really came in, I already loved ADEC. I grew up around ADEC, but my goal was, man, I'm going to love this place. I'm going to really seek to understand exactly why we do what we do, how we do what we do, before I go in with this big change agenda or vision that I'm going to bring. So I would just say you feel that pressure. If it's the first time you're going to be in a CEO role, you feel a pressure to make your impact. But I would really encourage people to kind of moderate that a little bit, because over the long haul, you will take that organization further if you learn how to love it, and you learn and you get to know it real closely, and then you start making those decisions. And you don't have to create that. That will come to you over time. You'll have those junctures that you cross and that you go through. And so those would be some of the key things I'd probably tell somebody.
Best advice I ever received as a new CEO was from a senior CEO who was getting ready to retire. And he said, the best thing you could do is listen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that reminded me of John Wooden, the great coach from UCLA, who said, be quick, don't hurry.
Yeah.
And I think you explained that really well.
Absolutely.
Learn to love the organization, be patient, listen, communicate effectively. So thank you for sharing those. We haven't talked about the big issue, of course, which is funding.
Yeah, sure.
It never comes up with us as CEO of roundtables.
Yeah.
So the landscape's changing so much, federal, the state. But can we talk a little bit about how do you sustain ADEC, 360 employees, all those facilities?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about sustainability.
Yeah. People that we serve are largely funded, and the types of services that we offer are largely funded through the Medicaid program. Number one, the answer to your question is stewardship. We need to steward the money that comes, because the reality is the rates that we're paid aren't sufficient to run a great organization. We have to find other funding, local funding. We need to find gifts, donations, grants in order to offer that ADEC standard of services. But for us, in our role, very important to stay connected at an industry level. That's critical. We need to understand what's happening at the State House at any given time, because that's critical for us. Staying connected with legislators, and then work those community relationships. But I think it's the better connected you are and the more relationships you have, the more hopefully runway you have. You can see some of that change coming and you have some opportunity to make adjustments. But you've got to be able to make the adjustments as well, because it's always changing. The work never stops on that front.
The importance of endowment, end-of-life giving. Can you talk a little bit about what ADEC's doing in the area of plan giving?
Yeah, it's huge. Number one, ADEC has had some large gifts over the years, and those are critical because, and we have investment that we manage, and that's because our funding environment ebbs and flows. We have years where those returns on the investments are what fill the gap for us, in addition to philanthropic support. So because we provide services to people in many cases for a large part of their life trajectory, we do get planned gifts, and that's certainly something we encourage people to consider whose families have been served by it, because those types of endowed funds, they create a source of stability in the midst of, again, the kind of the ebbs and flows of federal funding, state funding, priorities that different administrations have. So it's a big deal for us. And of course, Community Foundation stewards some chunks of money that people have given for the benefit of ADEC, and those are critical sources for us.
When you look into the future, you look at partnerships, the importance of employment. What do you see in the landscape 20 years from now, 25 years from now, when your son takes over as?
You think about a culture, I think that, and again, I'm gonna talk in real broad strokes, but over time, our awareness of the potential of people with disabilities has grown. Our acceptance, again, it's not that we're perfect, but we've seen progress on that front. I think that bodes well for 20, 25 years down the road. Then you think about technology and how that's going to trend. The way that AI is developing, the way that technology itself is developing, and the potential for people with disabilities and how that could benefit them. Honestly, I'm not enough of a futurist to even envision some of what that looks like. But we have a lot of people with communication barriers. I think that's an area that technology will continue to play a huge role in. I think we'll see innovation on mobility and things like that. And then we also have a society who's thinking more about, if we have a public restroom, do we have an adult changing table? I mean, things that are just as basic as that make all the difference in terms of whether some of the people that we serve will be able to engage with a venue or not. So I have some optimism. Now there's a direct workforce crisis that's looming. I hope technology does do a really good job in terms of creating some solutions. We need to certainly, as a society, continue to really value the investments that we're making there. I think we'll see people living with greater independence, some because of technology and some just because of, again, a continued kind of openness in our culture to including people with disabilities. And then I think we'll see the challenge of a diminishing direct workforce, and how that all balances out, I think, is up to humans like us to figure out.
Chris, what's something you've learned from the clients or even a client since you've been at ADEC?
I mean, you're learning constantly, and I get to some of the basketball games, the Silver Bullets basketball games that are a lot of our clients participate in, and just get the day programs, and it's where do you start? Because most of the people that we work with, a lot of the time, are smiling. They're really valuing their relationship with you. They're valuing the connection that you make. They tend to be pretty focused on the here and now and on the present, and all of that. There's just a lot to learn from that. I think that's what always jumps out to me the most, is the appreciation for little things that I miss all the time. Just that little interaction. I mean, that, again, these are things we say all the time, but when you work in my world, you get reminded constantly, and I really appreciate that. They teach, the people that we work with teach me every single day.
Wow.
Yeah.
And as we wrap up today, we always close with this question with our guests. What gives you hope?
I'll segue back to what I just said. I think the interactions that I have with people that we serve gives me hope. It gives me hope to know that there are 360 people who show up to work at ADEC every day because of their caring for a fulfilled life for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. gives me hope when I sit down with a donor. And I'll be honest, I'm sometimes nervous when I do that. And they look at me and say, boy, I want to find more ways to help ADEC. You realize that there's an awful lot of good. So speaking to the foundation, inspiring good, there's a lot of good in our community, and that gives me hope.
This show is a production of the Community Foundation of Elkhart County. It is powered by equipment from Sweetwater and recorded at the Community Foundation's offices in Elkhart's River District. Editing is done by the award-winning communication students at Goshen College, home of one of the best college radio stations in the nation. Listen to Globe Radio at 91.1 FM. Music is provided by Sensational Sounds. Learn more about the Community Foundation of Elkhart County at inspiringgood.org. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. We hope you're inspired and inspire good in your community.